So at this point, it's a good idea for us to talk about all the footage and downloads that you're going to get with this course. Over here in the downloads area, which you'll find at the top of the lessons, you can see that we've got quite a bit to look at. Here at the top, we've got the music and sound effects section. This contains all the music, sound design, Foley effects, wild tracks, and other audio resources that you're going to need throughout the course. I'd suggest that you start downloading these files now and get them stored safely somewhere on your hard drive. Next, we've got the footage. For each hands-on lesson, we've created a download package. They contain all the dailies needed to edit along with us for that lesson. You can choose to download all of these now, or you can wait till you get to each lesson and then download the footage at that point. Below all the lesson footage packs, you'll also see zipped files with additional footage. These contain all of the rest of the dailies from the film that we did not use during the lesson demonstrations. As you know, we won't be cutting every single scene of the film together, as a feature contains a lot of scenes. So demonstrating every single cut of every single scene would be too tedious to make you sit through. However, after you've completed the editing in the course, if you'd like to cut additional scenes, these zip files are going to contain the footage that you need. And finally, we've also provided the entire feature pre-edited for you, with dialogue and effects stems in the audio. You can use it as reference for your scene edits, or you can use it during the assembly and final editing stages of this course to connect and fill in the sections that you might not have edited yourself. As you get all of these zip files downloaded, you can go ahead and start unzipping them, because that's going to take a bit of time too. So obviously, this lesson has a little bit of homework. First, download all the music and sound effects. Then, choose whether to download the footage for all the lessons now, or wait and download it later as you get to each one. I'd suggest at least starting the download for the first lesson that we're going to be editing together, which is called Cutting the First Scene. Next, download the pre-edited feature, and then finally unzip everything onto your hard drive. Coming up in the next lesson, we'll be importing the footage, music, and sound effects into your editing software. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Hopefully by this point, you've downloaded at least the music, sound effects, and footage that you're going to need for the lesson titled Cutting the First Scene. Now, it's time to start importing everything into our editing software. The footage that you're going to be working with has already been optimized for editing. Normally, when you receive dailies from a production, you're going to be getting the footage from each camera, along with whatever in-camera audio was recorded. Then, separately, you'd be getting multiple sources of externally recorded audio, from boom mics, lavaliers, and so on. Then those would need to be synced with the footage. That's a pretty tedious process, especially across 1100 plus clips, so we've already done that for you. We've also applied some basic color correction to the footage so it looks a bit nicer and isn't quite as flat and desaturated as it would normally be right out of the camera. And of course, we've also labeled each file with the scene, camera angle, and take. So the first thing you'll want to do is a test import. You'll want to do this before you bulk import everything at the same time to make sure that you've got your settings right and then you don't have to re-import a billion files again later. Once you've imported them, check that you've got 2 channels of audio, each with a slightly different audio source.
Yeah, okay, right. We should have brought the auto leveler.
No, I mean, did you go after her?
Also, make sure that your picture looks good and is sized correctly for your screen. And then last, just do a quick check in your bin columns to make sure that you've got the frame rate at 2398. If everything looks good, you're ready to import the rest. Your process for bulk importing your footage and audio will of course vary slightly between editing programs. So if you're using a program like Avid, which does not respect folder structures on your hard drive, meaning that you need to organize the files from scratch directly in your editing software, then you're just going to want to import everything all at once into one folder or bin in Avid, or whatever other software you might be in that does that. For situations like this, I like to place all of my files into one folder on my hard drive so that I can just grab them all at once and then hit the import button. So, for example, you just create a folder called something like All Sources. Then you'd start by moving all your audio files into it. Then, to move all your footage into it, rather than having to open each folder that you've unzipped the footage into, just search your directory for something like .mp4, and this is going to reveal all the footage at the same time. Simply select it all, and then move it into your All Sources folder on your hard drive. Now that you've got everything into the same place, you could hop back into your editing program, make a bin called something like Importing, and then go grab everything out of your All Sources folder and import it into your bin at the same time. It's going to take a while, so you might want to leave this running overnight. The benefit to doing this is that otherwise you're going to have to kind of babysit the process, and you'll go into one folder, select 5 or 6 files, hit import. 20-30 minutes later, you'd have to come back to the next folder, the next folder, the next folder. This way, you can just select everything at once off your hard drive in one big folder, hit import, and walk away for a while. Now, if your software does import folder structures from your hard drive, you may want to organize everything on your hard drive in the way that you'll want it to be arranged in your editing program. Premiere is a good example of software that does this. So, in cases like this, you might want to skip ahead to the next lesson just to see how we suggest organizing your project. Specifically, check out the PDF below the next lesson to see our suggested folder structure. Then, you would just organize and label everything on your hard drive to mimic that layout and import that entire folder structure and containing footage and audio into your editing software along with the folders themselves. And that level of organization is going to transfer from your hard drive into your software. Now, with Premiere Pro especially, I want to point out a little glitch that you might actually encounter. If you import a folder using the media browser in Premiere Pro, and it contains a subfolder with only a single clip inside of it, Premiere has a habit of ignoring the subfolder. It's going to import the clip, unfortunately, by itself. So it's important to check that you have, in fact, imported all the footage correctly before you start editing, and watch out for this glitch. Alright, so this lesson has some homework. First, do a quick test import in your software to make sure the picture, audio, and frame rate all look correct. Next, bulk import all the audio and footage, either into one big importing bin or into organized folders if your software can import folder hierarchies from your hard drive. And finally, double check to make sure that you've at least imported the music, sound effects, and footage that you're going to need to edit scene 1. If you downloaded and imported everything already, that works too. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at exactly how to keep your project organized and learn how to ensure that we can find the footage and the audio that we need when we need it. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Organizing a feature-length film can be daunting. A feature-length movie is 10 times longer than most short films, so you're going to need a really good organization system to get through the sheer amount of footage that you need to look at. It's important to note that everyone organizes their thoughts differently. For that reason, we're going to look at a few organizational ideas so that you can use the method that works best for you. Here I have a bin container at the root of my project. This is where all of my bins live. Try to keep the root of your project fairly clean so it's easy to find what you need quickly. So in my project, I have 3 main folders, one for audio, one for footage, and one for my sequences. You'll notice that I've kept these in alphabetical order. You may have seen some examples of other editors who use a numbering system, something like this. In this example, I've used a set of 2-digit numbers with leading zeros to organize my folders in a specific order. So if I wanted my sequences folder to appear at the top of my project, I'd use a lower number. And if I wanted my audio folder to appear lower in the list, I could always use a higher number. There's no right or wrong way to go about this. Just use a system that's going to make sense for you. Personally, for me, I have no problem with good old alphabetical order. So I'm going to put my folders back to how they were. So let's take a look inside of the footage folder here. You can see that inside this folder, I've created several additional subfolders. In this case, I've created a subfolder for each group of 10 scenes, starting with scenes 1 through 9, scenes 10 through 19, scenes 20 through 29, and so on. So an important point that I just want to drive home about using numbers in bins or file names. You should always use leading zeros in your numbering system. Leading zeros are going to help keep your folders in order and stay visually even across the board. So here we have two different projects. On my left is a project that contains only 80 scenes. Because of this, I'm going to begin every number that's less than the number 10, aka it would be a single digit number normally, with a 0. And this way, I'm going to always have 2 digits at the same time. By doing this, your software is going to be able to use those numbers to alphabetize and keep things in correct numerical order. On the right, this project has 130 scenes. So, to keep things nice and even across the board, and in correct order, anytime I have a number that's lower than 100, I'm going to place 1 or 2 zeros in front of it so that the numbers always have 3 digits total. Not only is this going to help with readability in your project windows, it's also going to help your software keep things organized when automatically sorting folders for you. So let's hop back into our bins and we'll take a look at scene 43. I can quickly navigate to the scene folder for 40 through 49, expand it, and then find scene 43 in there near the top. Now, similar to my scene bins, I've also created specific bins in my audio folder where I can drop things like sound effects, wild tracks, and music. Below this lesson, you'll see that we've provided you a PDF file that shows you exactly how we've organized our bins so that you can match up to what we're doing. Let's take a look inside the bin for scene 1 of the film. You can see that my bin's already pretty organized, and I've sorted my clips by name and then organized them into a list. So if you're a data-driven person, you might like to view your clips in a list view like this. A list view is nice because you can assign metadata to your clips to describe what's in each. For example, here I've listed out what is a wide shot, what is Alex's coverage, and what is Sailor's coverage. On the other hand, if you're someone who prefers to look at footage in a more visual way, consider changing your bin view to thumbnails, or something like Avid Media Composer's frame view or Adobe Premiere's freeform view. These types of views are going to let you manually adjust the position of the thumbnails in your bin to group like items together. Oftentimes, editors are going to make groups of takes based on camera angle and character. Some editors who are using this type of view like to organize the thumbnails in their bin to act like a bit of a film strip by having the first clip in a row of thumbnails to represent the start of a shot, and then the last clip in a row of thumbnails would represent the end of a shot. And to do this, you would just be setting the thumbnail of each clip to be taken from early in the shot to a little bit later, and then even further into the shot, and then finally at the end of the shot, almost like keyframes from an animation. Working this way, an editor can quickly see the entire coverage of a shot without having to load it into the source and then actually play it back. Whichever way of working and organization system you decide to use, just pick the one that makes the most sense for how you think and for the scene that you're working on. Alright, this lesson is going to have some homework. First, organize your footage and audio into folders. Specifically, move all your scenes into folders or bins by groups of 10, and put the correct types of audio into corresponding folders and bins. If you need a concrete reference for exactly how we've laid out our project, again, be sure to reference the PDF below this lesson. Remember, if you only downloaded the footage for scene 1, that's okay, but you'll be using this organization system later as you download and import more of the dailies. Coming up in the next lesson, we'll be setting up the various timelines and sequences that you'll be using while reviewing the footage, choosing selects, and cutting your feature. Alright, we'll see you in a bit. The timeline is where you'll spend most of your, well, time. And a feature-length film usually has some unique requirements. So let's get into some tips and details about how to set up your timelines before you start cutting. A feature film usually has several more needs than other types of projects. For instance, you'll often have shots that you plan to send out for visual effects, shots that you received back from your visual effects team, a temporary color grade, a matte layer, and then various layers of notes for different departments, from producer's notes to VFX notes to simple internal reminders. So you're going to want to use multiple timelines for different needs. Let me show you what I mean. In the case of scene 43, for instance, my sequences bin for this scene includes 3 timelines. The first timeline is called sync, which just means that it's all of my footage in order of take and camera angle for that scene, so that I can get a general sense of what was shot by quickly scanning through the timeline. This is going to be a lot faster and easier than having to click and load up each individual clip into your source monitor. The next timeline in my bin we'll call the selects timeline. This is essentially a duplicated sequence of all of our sync, where we organize our takes and camera angles for each scene in a way that makes editing faster and easier. Old school editors might refer to these select sequences as chem rolls, named after the Chem flatbed editing manufacturer when editors were still cutting movies on actual strips of film. Sometimes this involves simply marking your favorite takes in some fashion. One method is to drop markers on the video track above your clips to indicate sections where you especially like something that you saw in a shot or take. Another method you might prefer is to lift your favorite shots, lines, and takes to the next video track higher. So these two ways of identifying and organizing your selects are both pretty simple and they're quick. However, you can get a bit more thorough if you've got the time or you have an assistant. Either way, this is going to actually pay off quite a bit later when cutting the scene by helping you edit faster and making sure that you don't miss any crucial moments in the performance. An example of a more advanced organization method is the line breakdown technique, which we're going to be teaching you how to create later in the course. So finally, I have a sequence here for my temp edit, and this is where I'm going to construct a quick and dirty temp edit of the scene from the selects that I pulled, usually with only 1 or 2 video tracks and a small handful of audio tracks, just enough to hold whatever's in my source footage. So, just to recap, for every scene, you're going to have a sync sequence, a select sequence of some fashion, and a temp or rough edit sequence. These are all very lightweight timelines with regard to the number of tracks involved. Later on in the feature editing process, when we begin assembling the film into sequences of scenes, and then finally, of course, into a complete movie, we'll combine these timelines onto one larger, more complex timeline with many more tracks. That's going to be our master edit timeline, and it might look something like this. Don't worry about creating this timeline now. We'll be making one later in the course when it's time to start assembling all the scenes that we've edited into the final feature. In your project, I'd recommend that you keep a bin of blank template timelines that you can copy and use when starting to cut each new scene. In my bin here, I have a blank copy of the master timeline ready to go for when I need it, along with a basic lightweight timeline to use for things like sync, selects, and rough cuts. So this lesson is going to have some homework. Go ahead and prepare these template timelines in your own software. No matter the editing tool that you use, you can pre-make the timelines that you'll need to get started working. That includes your sync timeline, your selects timeline, and your temp edit timeline. Check out the PDF below this lesson for an exact layout of the timeline templates that you should create. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to be reviewing the script, meeting the characters, and then you'll also have the option to watch the final version of the film that we'll be editing in this course. All right, I'll see you in a bit. In this lesson, we're going to be reviewing the script from our feature film Chapman, as well as meeting the various characters that we'll be encountering. When cutting on such a large project, you'll definitely need to use the script as your roadmap to put the film together. For each scene we edit and sequence that we construct, we'll be referencing it to make sure that we're telling the story and landing the moments in the way that the director and writers intended. As you can see, there are a few sections of the script that we've blacked out or redacted. This was done solely to keep the film and the course a bit more family-friendly. So moments that some might consider a little bit too adult or inappropriate have just been removed. Don't worry though, these are definitely not crucial to the story as a whole, and you won't be missing anything important by their exclusion. Below this lesson, you'll see a link to the script in PDF format. Go ahead and download it now, and save it to your hard drive, wherever you're keeping the rest of the materials for this course. It's only 59 pages long, and scripts are generally a very quick read, so you should be able to review the whole thing in less than an hour. While reading the script is definitely a required step, viewing the final film as it was originally edited is not. Obviously, on a real production, the film wouldn't exist yet. Since this film does already exist, I'll leave it up to your personal preference whether or not you choose to watch it before starting this project. If it were me, I would suggest not watching it so that you can keep a fresh perspective for your own edit. Either way, you can find a link below this lesson to where you can watch the final edited feature, which is about an hour and a half in length. Now, something I want to do real quick is formally introduce you to the main characters of the film so that you can start getting familiar with them. Let's start with our main character, Alex. Now, because this film uses flashbacks, we're going to have a current day, older version of Alex, and we'll also be meeting a younger version of Alex during the flashback scenes. Current day Alex is a troubled and somewhat unhappy soul who works as a locksmith in Los Angeles. Young Alex is a relatively happy kid living in the mountains of Colorado who has a crush on our second character. Meet Marie. Marie is the love interest in this film, and we're only going to see her during the flashbacks. As we come to find out, Alex moves away from his hometown, and while he's been gone, Marie unfortunately passes away from cancer. Next, we have Paul. We meet Paul in the present day, and also during flashbacks to Alex's youth. When Alex was young, he, Marie, and Paul were all childhood friends, and they spent their summers swimming and exploring nature in the mountains. We'll discover that Alex did have a crush on Marie, but ultimately Marie and Paul started dating, which Alex wasn't a big fan of. At the end of the film, we find out that the reason that modern-day Paul is on crutches is because he and Alex got into a fight over Marie, and Paul ended up falling off the Chapman Dam, becoming crippled. Alex, Paul, and Marie are our three main characters, with Alex being the protagonist. Throughout the film, we're also going to meet a handful of supporting cast members. We meet Sailor, Alex's present-day assistant in the locksmith shop, with whom he's had an on-again, off-again romantic relationship. And we also meet Claire, a childhood friend, now working at a rental counter in the airport, as well as Topher, another childhood friend, now working as a hotel manager back in Alex's hometown in Colorado. The film has a relatively small cast, so our main challenge is going to be the need to keep track of present day versus flashback, something that we're going to be devoting quite a bit of editorial time to in order to keep things clear for the audience. So, as we've mentioned, there's a little homework for this lesson. First, download and read the script using the link below this video. Either print it out or get it loaded up on a second monitor, phone, or tablet. And if you choose to, you can watch the final edited film using the link below the script. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at some of the production realities that we're going to be facing while working on a feature-length film. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Editing is all about the order and organization of ideas flowing together. But that's simply not how movies are filmed. They're often filmed out of order. Occasionally, single scenes are broken up over multiple days, and those days may not be back to back. Film production can be a complicated process, and oftentimes the editor is working side by side with the production crew as they're filming, whether on set or at a nearby location. But as is often the case in film production, the nature of the process doesn't lead to very organized footage. Things are intentionally filmed out of order to benefit the schedule, the budget, the weather, the cast and crew, or anything else that might arise when making the film. Because of this, feature-length editing has its own unique challenges. First, you may receive footage daily instead of all at once. Though if you do receive it all at once, it will likely be sorted by shooting day and not by scene. This requires you to develop a system that's going to allow you to scale as you go, meaning it needs to be adaptable for what might happen in the future. Fortunately, our project is already set up with some simple tools to allow for this. First, take a look at my bins here. You'll remember that our organization setup for this project has various subfolders created for groups of scenes, making it easier and more manageable to add footage to your project as you receive more assets. In addition, we had already created different timelines for various uses in our bin of templates. As you know, the structure of this course will allow you to download footage on a lesson-by-lesson basis if you choose to do so, mimicking the way an editor might receive dailies on a day-by-day basis. However, if you opted to download the entire folder full of footage at the start of the course, you may have already imported and sorted everything, and this will just be good reference for you on any future projects. So as we mentioned, the footage is often not going to be in order. Let's take a look at the completed timeline from Chapman and talk about what this actually means. In this timeline, you can see that the film begins with scene 1, and it ends with scene 85, as it should, unless you want to get creative with the edit and move things around. However, this is not how we received the film. Let's take a look at what we received on day 1 of shooting. And this was on day 2, then day 3, day 4, and so on. It's for this very reason that it's important for you to prepare your mindset to think out of order. In this course, we're going to be doing just that, working out of order. We might start with scene 1, but to emulate a typical production, we may then jump to scene 35, and then maybe backwards to scene 7. That's because typical professional feature-length film editors have to work quickly and are known to keep up to camera. The term keeping up to camera often refers to the editor cutting footage from the shoot day prior on the following day. That's going to allow the director and producers to have a chance to review it and make choices that might impact their filming decisions going forward. Working this way, you're going to move very quickly at the beginning of the process, working hard to keep up the camera. And then later, you'll spend a lot more time revising your cut at the end to clean up your earlier, much rougher edits. We mentioned that the footage might get a little bit disorganized in the process. The first rule of thumb when dealing with mislabeled or disorganized footage is to give the production crew a little bit of slack. Sometimes there are a lot of decision makers on set, and it's easy for a camera assistant or a script supervisor to mistakenly use the wrong scene number on a slate. Film crews work in very adverse conditions, from being very far away from each other and relying on walkie-talkies, or being in close quarters while everyone's talking over each other. They work in all manner of weather, from wind and rain to heat and sun, and overnight, and sometimes in extreme cold. Instead of blaming the production crew for mishaps, keep track of mistakes that you find. Let me give you a quick tour of some of the different things that you're going to encounter while going through the dailies. First, some scenes weren't filmed, such as scene 13 that we see here in the script. It was just cut out of the film. Second, some scenes are mislabeled, so the slate doesn't match the script. For example, here, all these shots are slated as scene 80, but clearly they represent a few different scenes since all the shots are completely different. It turns out that some of these shots are coverage from what the script says should be 75, 76, 77, and 78. It was a little confusing when we first saw this, but it was pretty easy to figure out what we were looking at. For example, the footage slated as scene 80 and 80C shows Alex lying on the hood of a car, but in the script, we can see that that's supposed to be scene 78. So you might just write 80 and 80C next to scene 78 in the script to keep track of how things were actually slated on the set. Third, some shots are censored, and you'll see them labeled as such. Just as some parts of the script have been redacted, this has just been done to keep things family friendly. I think you'd thank me if you knew some of the things that we had to look at. I still have not fully recovered. Alright, and fourth, some shots have vague slates, like XX-01 or V06S-01. And other shots just weren't slated, so we've assigned descriptive file names, like miscellaneous aerial shots of mountain. These are all relatively common things to encounter when going through dailies on a large production, and it's just a matter of keeping track of the issues, making notes in the script, and then organizing things as best as possible in your editing software. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to introduce you to a few different ways of creating breakdowns and selects for your footage. Then together, we'll create the breakdown that we're going to be using to edit scene 1 of our film. Alright, I'll see you in a bit.